Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, many of you have been pointing out to me in the comments that BlueJay has a new video out, which is true, though I haven't done a lot of his old ones yet, so obviously there's much more content there. I have done a few BlueJay reactions. This one's called The Dumbest War Nobody Talks About, and I have to say that this is a pretty high bar, because there have been some pretty dumb wars that we don't talk about, right? The Australians went to war with the emus. You have the War of the Bucket. You had the football war down in Central America. We've had some pretty dumb wars. And we've done some videos about some of those dumb wars, which I will put down in the description if you want to check out those links, and I'll throw them up at the end. But we're going to check this one out. As always, the link is in the description to the original content from BlueJay. Big shout out to Matthew, just up the road from me in my home county of Trumbull County in Cortland, Ohio, and Josiah in Lincoln, Delaware. Thank you guys so much for your support on Patreon. Let's dive in. Hey guys, it's Chris from the future. I'm editing this video right now, and I just want to give you a heads up before we dive into this one. I try to be a family-friendly channel, but this was definitely not a family-friendly video. So just be aware of that. Definitely some language, some references, things like that. Just giving you the heads up now. Enjoy.
Oh, Daddy's got a story to tell. Is it long? Sit down. For today's tale, we'll need to dial the clock back to the time when optimism died, the 20th century. It's a story of small disagreements festering beyond reason, a chronicle of quarrels lasting through all seasons.
He's crazy. Baldur's Gate 3 is trash, it said. Is that out yet? Because I think I might want to play that one. I've been playing Starfield a lot the last few days. A lot of fun with that one.
Fable of ideologic conflict growing tenser than treason, all of which culminated into what was called a war, despite no shots being fired. Dad, I already know about the Cold War. Yada yada, better dead than red, I know the drill. What? That pathetic decades-long temper tantrum over whose money system was good and whose was the unholy abomination spawned from the bowels of the ninth circle of hell? No. If I want to watch children cry about how numbered paper was handled while throwing around tubes, I go play Monopoly. I like my near-military conflict.
Isn't it interesting how often major historical events are actually tied to other ones, right? Like, you know, people learn about the Vietnam War, but really the Vietnam War was just a hot war that was part of the Cold War. So was Korea, and so was the Cuban Missile Crisis, and so was Afghanistan, the first one, the one with the Soviets. All of these places in which they became proxies for this superpower battle that was existing, right? Same thing with the United States. So much of its history comes down to that issue of slave powers versus free powers, you know, North and South. And, you know, a lot of these things really aren't what they seem. They're just smaller pieces of something much, much bigger if you look at the roots.
Looks like I like my woman. Full of crabs.
I am going to object to this. Forget the part about women being full of crabs, but anytime you mention anything about women, if you're going to use a picture of the beautiful, the gorgeous, the amazing Kate Blanchett, it better be positive. Me likey some Kate Blanchett.
I'm sorry. We're going to talk about the Lobster War. It's the mid-1900s, and Europeans haven't quite grown out of their main character phase and need to make sure no one forgets. Oh, it's funny because the two movies are so different. Right. I'm here too. Okay. Hey, drop it, drop the oil! But as the 1960s rolled around, tragedy struck. America had a Jell-O mold phase. But other than that,
that's really pretty freaking tragic right there. Absolutely.
All of France's African colonies claimed they wanted independence, and as France loved being seen as the in vogue colonial power, they granted it to them to look hip, and definitely not because they couldn't afford another colonial war. This was all fine and dandy, unless you were a French fisherman who just lost their free rein to catch lobster off the Mauritanian coast. Slow your roll, Ratatouille, you need a permit for that now. Ah yes, there is plenty of lobster, don't be so shellfish. Leave the area and cut the puns or I'll detain you faster than a panzer tank. Don't get all crabby. I'll be out to your hair in a pinch. Stop! I'm claustrophobic.
Oh my gosh, make it stop. The puns.
few of these fishermen heard some juicy gossip about this hot new spot just brimming with lobster on the other side of the Atlantic. And for the cherry on top, they were practically free for the taking, being surrounded by nothing but the open water, salty air, Brazil. The fishermen figured that last part could be a problem, you know, sovereign waters or something. So they sent out a delegation to negotiate a license. But waltzing up to a country and saying, "Holy cannoli, that's a lot of lobster."
I love the little details that we get in these videos. Like there's a little tiny the Jesus statue up there overlooking Rio that just kind of popped. I don't think it was there when it started. I thought it just kind of popped up. Maybe not.
Negotiate a license, but waltzing up to a country and saying, "Holy cannoli, that's a lot of lobster ravioli. How about instead of you guys fishing them to fuel your $20 million canning industry, I do the fishing and money getting part," would most likely be met with, "Haha, eat shit." Therefore, an elaborate ruse was needed to mask their fishing intentions. So they put together a pitch that was so intricate, so convincing, that the Brazilians would have no choice but to allow them coastal access to their lobster, all while being completely oblivious of their objective to harvest them.
Thank you for meeting with us. We come to you with a pressing issue. You see, there have been seismic reports, sounds, if you will, of a disturbance in the deep, originating from your coast of Brazil. Jean, if you could just describe this disturbance for us.
Of course.
And you see, it was those clicks, thank you, Jean, it was those clicks that led us to Lobster. Now for our next step.
Okay, sorry, I think I know what this is. You boys are just here to conduct some routine research on lobster nurseries and just need one of those permits for a few boats, right?
Yeah, that's what it is.
That is exactly what we wanted to do.
So, I mean, I guess what they're doing is they're counting on the fact that Brazil's not really going to police this and is not really going to figure out exactly what's truly going on.
Pierre, we got the research license.
The French fishermen acquired a license allowing 3 boats to conduct research on lobster nurseries, which should normally be a relatively non-invasive process. But they looked at this permit and thought, haha, that's a funny way to spell 4. And everyone knows research is only as good as your sample size, and the French like to be as accurate as possible. Sure, this is all technically in violation of their license, but I've been driving with a suspended one for 3 years now and haven't had any problems. Nevertheless, Western European nations have this refined analytical process to find out just how much they can bend the rules when it comes to a foreign country. So they ran the numbers on Brazil.
Brazil.
We're good! While the fishermen thought they'd pulled off a successful bamboozle, Brazilian authorities already thought something smelled fishy about these fishermen. And luckily for them, they also had a similar analytical process.
France.
Multi-century history of colonization and exploitation, including but not limited to.
Maybe we should check it out. Representatives were...
Well, good for Brazil for catching on to what was happening, right? So this kind of happened throughout history. You have these Western European powers like Portugal, Portugal, Spain, England, France, colonizing in North and South America. And then when that starts to get decolonized, they shift their focus to Africa. Well, now in the mid 20th century, Africa is being decolonized. So now where are you going to go? Well, now you start looking back at South America again.
Sent from the Brazilian Navy to act as inspectors and make sure the French fishermen were honoring the foundation of these nations' crustacean relations. They should be around here. Oh, that's them. Oh, welcome to the Red Lobster. We had an infest. Table for 2, yes? I've got the perfect romantic spot for you two Romeos. What? No, we aren't. Doesn't matter. We're here representing the Brazilian Navy. Oh, shit, Brazil? Yes. Welcome to the Red Lobster, a research center. Yes. Let me just get our head aside. Pierre has been making some incredible progress. Oh, yeah? What have you found out in your research? They hurt. Oh, what? You get pinched, Lil? No. You'll never amount to anything. Upon investigation, they found that, along with violating the boat limit, the ships were not conducting research, but in fact, carrying out large-scale predatory lobster fishing with a trawl.
Yeah, I'm convinced here that France really thought Brazil would give them the permit and then never give it another thought after that, but they were wrong.
Trawling is this neat practice where you put a net in the water and catch the everything.
What could go
Environmental
wrong?
impact? What environment? So Brazil was like, stop, and revoked the fisherman's license, sending them lobster tail between the anchors back on over to the land of macaroons in April of 1961. And with that, things returned to normal.
Excuse me, there have been seismic reports, sounds, if you will.
The fisherman returned in November to request another research license, but this time,
This takes a lot of guts. You get caught, you get run off, and you come back and say, can we have another license just like the one we had before? We promise this time we're actually doing research. Really, truly, we are.
further out at sea on the continental shelf, outside of Brazil's territorial waters, which stretch 760,320 gumballs from the shore, or for simpletons 12 miles. This request was granted, and for the rest of the year, Brazil kept a close eye on them while the fishermen played the nautical version of, I'm not touching you. But just like an early 2000s cartoon fish, the French just couldn't keep their grubby little paws off those luscious lobsters. And on January 2nd, 1962, the French boat Cassiope was found catching lobster about 10 miles off the shore.
Oops. This is a rough time for European-American relations, isn't it? This is the same year you're going to have the Cuban Missile Crisis unfold.
10 miles! Got you! Haha! You're within our waters now, cheese boy! You sure? Hold this! 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. A Brazilian corvette seized the French vessel for catching lobster without authorization, probably hitting a sick drift as it pulled up, but then again, everything I know about Brazil comes from Fast 5. Anyway, by now shit's getting
Different
pretty
kind of
serious and Mom
Corvette.
and Dad need to get involved. So whilst the fishermen and Navy battled the lobster sea, the French and Brazilian governments battled the diplomacy. The War of the Pen commenced, and at the heart of this battle in the fierce political trenches was one vital question. Like, what is a lobster? Sounds like a silly question, right? What is a lobster? Why, it's the underwater excavator, the crustacean of the basin, the pogo stick with a prick. But even my definition of a lobster as nature's gripper snippers wouldn't have been sufficient for the contending nations.
The number of puns and like just catchy sayings that he's got in this is phenomenal.
They wanted to know whether or not a lobster was a fish. France made the claim that a lobster was in fact a fish, so therefore they had the right to catch them according to the basis for fishing on the high seas set by the Geneva Convention of 1958. Brazil, for their part, pushed the thesis that lobsters were not a fish, but in fact an economic resource, a part of their continental shelf that they had the sovereign right to exploit,
Interesting.
according to a different provision of the same Geneva Convention. They said, citing a treaty they didn't sign. And this wasn't like
That they didn't sign but now conveniently want to appeal to. And every nation does this, right? We all look for the loopholes. We look for the laws and the agreements that we can twist and turn and make favorable to our side in any debate.
like your average 12-hour Twitter beef. This diplomatic battle lasted all through 1962 and part of 63,
Dang.
which is hilarious considering the other things going on the world stage during that time.
Yeah.
Kennedy is having us increase our troop presence in Vietnam. 400 Green Berets were a start, but they aren't going to be enough.
Agreed. We must be careful, though. We don't want to replace the French as a colonial force in the area and bleed as the French did.
That's a good point. Got any advice, France?
So now with the pangolin being
Yeah,
a
remember
geo-
that Vietnam starts out as part of French Indochina, and Dien Bien Phu falls in 1954, which is what eventually leads to the crisis in Vietnam that the United States decides to get involved in.
Yes, according to our established law of modus operandi derived from the Fly Eater Sarlacc pit model. Yes. Then, when taking the
Wars
Laplace
reference.
transform of this in a matrix with the crustacean equation, we find that lobster are in fact fish. No! This completely violates the Capricorn theorem.
And this is one of the reasons why you have international courts now, right? Like at The Hague in the Netherlands, is to try and help mediate these disputes so they don't end up in war.
Let's back this up. While that reality sadly only exists in my headcanon, France and Brazil did do their best to support their claims and own each other with facts and logic. Brazil's evidence was that lobsters were like oysters and that they both cling to the ocean floor, making them a part of the continental shelf. But France argued that when a lobster hops around the ocean floor, it's essentially swimming, making it a fish, which prompted Brazil's Navy expert in oceanography, him, to spit some iconic bars. If a lobster is a fish because it moves by jumping, then a kangaroo is a bird. Yeah, that's actually a pretty solid point. Yeah, and if a kangaroo is a bird, then a flying fish is a spaceship because it jumps through the air. A little weaker, but okay. And if a flying fish is a spaceship, then a seagull is an oil rig because it dives underwater. Okay, let's settle down. No, if a seagull is an oil rig, then my wife is a fucking whore because she jumps from man to man. Okay, so I made up the end there, but don't worry. The first part is a real quote that you can safely add to your Instagram bio. While mom and dad fight in their room, let's check on how things are going on the water, and wow, France just doesn't care. Like the IRS at my front door, the fishermen just kept coming back, completely unfazed by the international turmoil and monolithic tubes of death pointed at their face. So the Brazilian Navy just continued seizing their ships, going, "Stop it," while making them sign a paper swearing they wouldn't return. But the French were like,
Start seizing another sovereign nation's ships, even if you feel like you're justified. Now you're starting to inch toward war, right? This is what one of the causes that leads to the War of 1812 is the British stopping American ships and impressing American sailors. The U.S. puts this blockade on Cuba in 1962 for the Cuban Missile Crisis, where they're going to stop and search ships, Soviet ships that are delivering cargo to Cuba. These are the things that ramp up tensions.
I can't read this. It would often just come back anyway. In one instance, a French ship was caught by a patrol off the northeastern coast to order them to sail to deeper waters. At first, the fisherman captain ignored them, but while he may not have spoken Portuguese, there are only a few ways you can interpret a blaring alarm stating "Postos de Combate."
And it's impossible to think that all of these French captains weren't aware of the situation, right? They had to know what they were involved in at this point. They were all well aware of what the boundaries were, what the dispute was. They're just conveniently ignoring it because of the almighty dollar, or franc in this case.
Postpone the confetti? But you promised! Sources differ on the exact timing, but it was around now when the French fishermen were getting pretty fed up with being told what to do, so they started to complain. And by complain, I mean they personally petitioned warships for protection from French President Charles de Gaulle himself. De Gaulle said Lobster, and granted the request, sending gunboats along with 5 more fishing vessels to the Brazilian coast. The French sailed over with a lot more confidence this time. I mean, they've got defenses now.
An escalation, right? Every little bit that ramps up the tension just gets you closer and closer to somebody slipping up, somebody firing, somebody letting their temper get the best of them and just getting things out of control.
Now, when has that ever failed France? But unfortunately for them, Brazil is about as likely to let them swipe their salty sea spiders as Hollywood is to pay their writers. So the Brazilian Navy boarded these fishing boats without a second thought. Whoa shit, I didn't think they'd seize them with us right here. Well, should we do something? No, you crazy? Haven't you seen Fast 5? Much like a—
So Brazil at this point is counting on the fact that the French aren't, they're trying to give a show of force, but they're not actually going to back it up, right? So we'll just keep on doing what we're doing. Dare them to fire on us.
Pilot to a millionaire's island, the French Navy sat there and did nothing. But the same couldn't be said on the diplomatic front, as it was then that the French ambassador to Brazil visited President João Goulart about the issue. Goulart stated he didn't want any trouble with France, and made the surprise presidential order to release 3 captured fishing boats and allow them to fish. Honey, they reopened that Red Lobster.
So he's trying to ramp down the tensions. He's trying to give some concessions in the hope that it'll be returned.
We are a loyal Long John Silver's family. As expected, the Brazilian people were none too pleased about this, and the resulting backlash pushed the government to rescind this permission shortly thereafter. Things then escalated even further when in late February 1963, Brazil delivered an ultimatum. All Frenchies have 48 hours to skedaddle to the land of poodles, else they'd get the noodle.
Exact quote right there.
I may or may not have written that line while intoxicated, but I wouldn't dare delete a line full of such eccentric flavor. However, over in France, this lobster war was really starting to get on de Gaulle's nerves. First they can't fish, then they can. Just kidding, they can't. Oops, now they've got 2 days to leave town. God, I don't understand this emotion I'm feeling. What you are experiencing is known as mixed signals, sir. No, I'm sure I tuned this radio to AM. No, I mean, like, you know when a girl is kind of hinting—
I don't know that it is mixed signals, though, because it seems like Brazil's been pretty consistent in standing for what it believes its rights are in this case. They're just trying to keep things from getting too tense. They're trying to back off. They're trying to give a show of good faith here to keep things from going to the next step.
She likes you, but you can't quite tell if she's into you because her actions give conflicting signs. Those are mixed signals. Paul, I'm rich and the president of France. I don't get mixed signals, I get bitches, so don't speak to me about your poor people problems. Now, on one hand, Brazil is an important strategic partner of the French. The latter has invested over 1,000 million francs into the former, and they rely on the iron smelting, textiles, and chemical products of Brazil. Also, Brazil is capitalist and can help fight nearby growth of communism. So, some would say, it would be in the best interest of France to—
Remember what I said at the beginning of this video, right? Everything's got that underlying root cause of this Cold War that's going on worldwide. And everybody's kind of falling into, even if they're not directly allied to the United States or the Soviet Union, they're tending to fall under spheres of influence. And the United States is exerting its influence, especially in the Western Hemisphere, kind of looking back to the Monroe Doctrine all the way back in the early 19th century, where we're basically saying to Europe, stay out of the Americas. This is our domain.
be like, wow, you know, maybe we shouldn't go to war over the ocean bugs that piss out their face. But on the other hand, this wasn't the people's France, this was de Gaulle's France. And seeing as how this was the man who tried escaping World War I prison camps 5 times, once while posing as a nurse, it should be no surprise to hear that de Gaulle was a very stubborn man. And this stubborn man considered Brazil's actions to be a slight on the majesty of France.
So stubborn that he was like one of the people that people like Churchill and Eisenhower least liked having to deal with, because he was so stubborn and so difficult. And when they presented him with the plan for Operation Overlord, for example, he started telling them all the things that were wrong with the plan. And basically Eisenhower had to tell him, well, I appreciate what you're saying, but it's too late to change the plans now. They're already in motion. There's nothing we can do. De Gaulle basically felt that he spoke for France. He was France. And not an easy guy to deal with.
He did not back down, but instead dispatched the French destroyer Tartu to the Brazilian coast. Tempers are flaring, ministers are swearing. With this newest escalation, Brazil is preparing. The newspapers have been rousing the public, and the atmosphere in Brazil is one of imminent war.
Newspapers, I tell you what, don't underestimate the power that the press has had in influencing historic events worldwide, especially in the last couple hundred years. We just talked about this in the video about McKinley. Look at how much the press had a role in spinning up the American public for the war with Spain. And the time was, today the news and the press and everything, they're all about trying to appear impartial, right? But there was no pretense of that 100, 200 years ago. A lot of newspapers, for example, were like the Democrat or the Republican. Like they literally acknowledged themselves as mouthpieces for a political ideology. So very often used as a weapon to get what you want.
II by itself wasn't a huge concern. What made things scarier was where it came from. A whole task force of French ships merely 3 days away, containing not only a state-of-the-art aircraft carrier, but also a tanker named Le Baise, which means the fuck in French, which is also a river in France, which also flows through the town of Condom. Mobilize the Navy. Understood, sir. Wait. And
I need a minute to process all of that. Okay, this is definitely an escalation.
The Air Force. But there's one small problem with this mobilization. It's the eve of Brazil's favorite holiday, the Carnaval. A time for wild celebration, dancing to music, stealing comically large vaults with Dodge Chargers. Oh wait, that's Fast 5 again. And this year, people were really memeing this whole situation. Even some masked revelers went around with lobster costumes. So much of Brazil's personnel were on short leave, but with some effort, they mobilized enough men, granted them war pay, and launched ships to search for the Tartu under Operation Lobster. Along with these ships, Brazil continued to mobilize to meet the French at sea. Because sure, their arsenal was full of vintage World War II vessels, and sure, they only had enough ammunition for 30 minutes of combat, and sure, they lacked adequate fuel supplies, and sure, some ships were decommissioned with mechanical problems, and sure, the French had a state-of-the-art Navy and Air Force to counter them, but at least they had their spirit. and family. Brazil's planes that had been searching for the Tartu finally spot it, causing it to start shooting exercises, probably to deter the aircraft. The plane responded by flying even lower to show they aren't messing around.
Well, there's so many parallels here with what was going on with the Cuban Missile Crisis not long before all of this, right? Starts out simple enough, gets escalated. You're talking about stopping ships. You're talking about sending air power in that kind of gets warned off, and then somebody makes a wrong turn, and then you worry that it gets escalated too far.
Oh wow, that's cute. Neat little guns you got there. Uh-oh, what's this? These looks like rockets. Wow, these sure are big, huh? Brazil
That was fantastic. I really like that part right there.
ships made their way towards the Tartu's location late at night. Dawn approached and the sea was veiled with a fog. In the distance, their radar detects something in the water. Making their way closer, tensions running high, they finally made out the Tartu in the mist and oh, it's gone. Running low on fuel, the Tartu retreated and was replaced with a much weaker ship.
Oh hey, what about us?
You'll be fine, another ship is coming. Hey guys, what's up? Oh, with the playing field set and more Brazilians on the way, it was now just a matter of who would shoot first. Hey, maybe we should go back and fish where we belong. Africa. The French ships decided to head back across the Atlantic. After this, an agreement was signed where Brazil would allow limited French ships to fish for 5 years while sharing profits with Brazil, who would also get to expand the nautical miles of its territory. You know, just a few. 100. While in the end, France decided war wasn't worth it. To be honest, I'm surprised it got even remotely this far. Running some numbers, if one anti-aircraft gun on one French vessel fired for just 11 minutes, say in case it wanted to teach some smart-ass aircraft a lesson, you'd already rack up an ammunition bill more expensive than the $3 million a year the French fishermen were raking in. But to be honest, with the cost and street cred for a European nation—
I was going to say, this isn't really about the Lobster at this point. This is about nations exerting their rights, their influence, and this is about the message you're sending to everybody else. So it becomes so much more than what it actually is.
Losing a diplomatic war with Brazil over lobster, perhaps World War III would have just been worth it. The Lobster War, 8 out of 10 stars.
That was interesting. And you know what? There's so many stories like that throughout history where it did escalate and it did become war. And a lot of people died because they couldn't find a diplomatic solution. So we ought to talk more about these times when it worked out. And we're going to do some stuff on the Cuban Missile Crisis very soon. I've been reading up on it. Really, really fascinating stuff. So I definitely want to cover that some more. But let me know your thoughts. Use the comment section below. Shout out to Ruth in Walnut Port, Pennsylvania, and Rachel in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Thank you so much for your support. Check out some of the links that I mentioned about some of those other absurd wars throughout history. I'll put some up on the screen as well. Thanks for watching.